Hello everyone on this in where I am anyway in Ontario. It's a beautiful fall day. So we've talked a ton about auditory processing and we're nearing an end on that section, if you will, that series. So I want to talk today about something that I know a lot of parents are wondering about in terms of, okay, we've talked about the types of auditory processing, we've talked about what it looks like and all that type of stuff, but ultimately let's talk about what are the causes of poor auditory processing or even auditory processing disorder, and therefore what are some solutions, because that's what my work at Building Better Brains is all about, is digging into the solutions and the root cause, which I should mention before I forget. I will be talking about in depth on November 21st, 10 a.m. Eastern, which for most people will be on 10 a.m. on Saturday morning, depending where you are in the world. And I will be doing a full live masterclass, all about the root cause of why so many of our kids are struggling. But enough about that. So basically, I talk to a lot of parents and they're told that their child has poor auditory processing. They might have auditory processing disorder, and so often parents will basically be told that there's nothing they can do. We don't know the cause, and other times they'll be told it's genetic. And actually, a lot of the research is totally showing that that's not the case at all. That in fact, in most cases, poor auditory processing develops after a child is born, in early infancy to late infancy. And I'm going to get into some of the reasons today. I will say Wednesday, I'm going to be talking about the other reasons, because there's just too many to do in one video. So very important to get onto this so that we can address the root cause. So number one, let's talk ear infections. So they used to know, or they've known for quite a long time, that children with dyslexia, learning disabilities, have a much higher rate of ear infections, and they might not have had a ton. Like, I've worked with kids who've had one or two, but they do know that some kids have had a history of ear infections and that there was a link with that, but they really couldn't find the link in terms of what was causing that. And then the debate very quickly ended not that long ago when more research came out related to that. So basically what happens is ear infections, whether it's chronic or just a one or two, will cause impairments of the auditory cortex, and as well as structures within the middle ear and so forth. And what will happen is even short-term hearing loss that occurs due to these ear infections can compromise the auditory pathways, which results in poor processing of sound or information being received through the brain, or going to the brain, I should say. And so, as I said, a lot of the kids I work with have had some to a few ear infections. There's actually cases where people aren't aware that their child has an ear infection. You can even get strep in the ear, which was news to me a few years ago when I found out that was the case with my daughter, and we didn't even know that she had an ear infection. So there's a lot going on there, and why that can impact that. And also what happens is the infection can damage the cilia, which we often refer to as the tiny hairs in the middle ear, but the cilia are like tiny hairs, but they're like little receptor cells. And what can happen is those receptor cells can become less sensitive. They can become damaged, and for different reasons, not just from ear infections, even extreme constant exposure to sound, can cause those little hair-like structures to just break right off. And that will compromise or cause impairments in the auditory pathway and how information is received or delivered to the brain. So very, very important to look at the history of ear infections. And I do want to say, obviously I can't get into all of that today, but yes, there is hope. So if you know your child has had a history of chronic ear infections or some ear infections, or you think that could be a factor, then don't panic, because you can actually heal that cilia within the ear, as well as the different, the whole auditory structure, or the whole auditory nerve and the structures within that auditory system. Okay, number two is the next biggie in terms of just general learning difficulties with auditory processing aside, as well as auditory processing, and that is brain organization. And basically, okay, so the auditory cortex is on the left side of the brain, and the visual cortex is on the right side of the brain. So most of our dyslexic children dyslexia is, the case is that they have a dominant right side of the brain, and their left side of the brain, where the language center is, as well as where the auditory cortex is often underdeveloped. And there's often a situation where there's not a whole lot of communication going on between the left and right brain hemisphere. So there's basically poor connectivity between the left and right side of the brain. And what happens as a result is one side of the brain will become overdeveloped, and because the right side of the brain is the first side of the brain to develop from ages, newborn to 2, then when there's poor connectivity, the right side of the brain could be expecting the left to do something and it's not doing its job. So then it just takes over and it's doing a job that it really shouldn't be doing. And so then the left side of the brain ends up remaining, somewhat to seriously underdeveloped, depending on how serious the situation can be. And so that left side of the brain, where the auditory cortex is, will result or can result in poor auditory processing or very serious auditory processing disorder. So let me know, so far in the comments below, does any of this resonate in terms of ear infections, or maybe you're suspecting something like that could be a factor? What about brain connectivity? And that's going to lead me into my next part, which I'm saving for a point on its own, and that is crawling. So it's related to connectivity, but I wanted to point that out because it is so important and it is such a factor with so many of my clients, and the research shows that as well. So crawling is the first movement our babies do that is cross-lateral. So both sides of the body are doing something different. So then both sides of the brain are being stimulated at the same time, and they're working together. And it helps to strengthen that band that's between the left and right brain hemisphere so that information can travel very easily, and it becomes a super highway for that information to travel back and forth. If a significant amount of crawling does not happen, which is very often the case with so many of our children, my daughter included, then that brain connectivity does not become as strong. And that's when we can have these gaps and we can have one hemisphere becoming more dominant and so forth. And the other thing is that crawling helps to integrate those retained primitive reflexes, which if you haven't heard about before, check out previous videos or my website. And because we just have so many baby carriers and saucers and swings and all that type of stuff, this is really opening the door for our children to have, basically poor brain organization and poor connectivity, and then also weak auditory processing. So the last one I'm going to talk about today, number 4, is dairy sensitivities and allergies. So I cannot tell you how many of my clients absolutely thrive, and I'm not saying all of them. There's no one size fits all in my clinic, but dairy allergies are huge, or dairy sensitivities are huge with auditory processing. So let me explain. So number 1, dairy allergies or sensitivities like gluten will cause inflammation, and that will result not just in the brain and the gut, but it can result in the ear and obviously the auditory nerve, which is all part of that whole system. But more than that, it will cause a buildup of mucus. And you might even know this because I can't tell you how many of my clients have either had a history of ear infections because of dairy allergies, and the infection is not easily drained because of a buildup of mucus. These kids can sometimes be kind of mucusy. They're always clearing their throat. Parents will say, yeah, it's true. They really have all of these symptoms. And so what happens is this buildup of mucus in the ear canal and so forth in the middle ear will prevent the child from distinguishing certain sounds, or the auditory nerve from receiving certain sounds or information correctly. And it's incredible the amount of parents, they do my program, they know that there's really 2 parts. There's the nutrition part and then the brain organization part. And they're always gung-ho, some of them, to get into the brain organization. They think our diet's healthy enough, we don't really need to do this part. But they do it, and they're often absolutely shocked, as are the teachers, once we start looking at nutrition, maybe eliminating dairy. And again, I'm not a one-size-fits-all person, but I will talk more about that in the live training that I'm doing on the 21st of November, which you can sign up for free. Basically you really want to look at dairy as a factor, and you want to make sure you're eliminating it completely if you're going to go down that road, and you want to do it long enough, because too often people will say, well, we tried that and it didn't work. And sometimes it's because we didn't give it a good go, or we didn't really completely eliminate it. It's hidden in a lot of other foods under a lot of other names. So basically, you really want to be aware that mucus can impair the processing and the delivery of that message to the auditory cortex in the brain. So once again, let me know if you think any of these factors that I talked about today, which I will talk about more causes and solutions on Wednesday, but let me know in the comments below if any of this resonates. And once again, there will be the free live training on November 21st at 10 a.m. Saturday for most people, depending where you are in the world. Please join me, and I will post the link for that in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and share if you found this helpful. It might be really helpful for someone else.